everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today and welcome to our very special Juneteenth conversation. For the first time in Cast and Crew history, we as a collective organization are recognizing and honoring Juneteenth. Employees have the day off, which is great, but there are so many questions about the actual meaning of Juneteenth, and many wonder, what actually does this day mean to me? As a Black woman from Texas growing up right outside of Galveston, which is the birthplace of Juneteenth celebrations were common. However, I too can say that there was always so much more that I wanted to know. So today, it doesn't matter how familiar with Juneteenth you are, this conversation is for you. And with that said, I'm honored to be here today with educator and historian Naomi Carrier, as well as writer and producer Chardee Sellers, as we discuss not only the history and origins of Juneteenth, but also the importance of this pivotal day. So first, I would love to chat with Naomi Carrier. Naomi, if you can please, or as I lovingly call her, Mrs. Carrier, if you can please introduce yourself.
Good morning. It's such a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk about Juneteenth, being a historian all my life in the state of Texas. This is why I have been so involved in the Emancipation Trail from Galveston to Houston. My book, Go Down on Hannah, which expresses 15 of the historical reenactments that I have been contracted to do. And so now I'm giving out a lot of information on Juneteenth because it's an opportunity to do public education. So the first thing I want you to know is, what is Juneteenth? It is a holiday. It is a holiday because on June 19, 1865, General Gordon Granger arrived at Pier 21 in Galveston and announced this to the people. This is General Order number 3, which is not the entire Emancipation Proclamation. The people are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former slaves and masters. And the connection heretofore existing between them becomes now that of the employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain at their present homes and to work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. And this is by order of Major General Gordon Granger. So the people were told that they were emancipated, but don't go anywhere. Stay exactly where you are. And this was very confusing, which made Juneteenth a holiday. It is not a law. It is only an announcement that you are free. It's also filled with hope and despair. What I want you to know from my explanation is why Juneteenth was late, why slavery and forced labor continued, and where we must go from here. So looking at my first slide, it is the Galveston Daily News announcement of Texas sugar, Texas syrup, and Texas molasses. Note this is December 6, 1885. It is no news to my friends in the trade that I handle the product of several Texas sugar plantations, among others, the celebrated Sugar Land plantation. And I have now on hand and receiving daily choice white, off-white, yellow, clarified, and seconds, all perfectly pure goods, not to be compared with New York productions. And these are all grades of molasses and syrups, including the old-fashioned sugar house molasses made by old-fashioned open kettle process. I am also handling Texas cotton and lots of it. If you'll just hold it on that slide for a minute so that you can understand why is it the Texas slaves were not emancipated until 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln meant the Emancipation Proclamation to be in effect on January 1st, 1863, but it was not in effect for Texas slaves until 2.5 years later, June 19th, 1865. And even when they were told that they were emancipated, which did not happen all at once for 300,000 enslaved people, they were told to stay put, to not go anywhere. So what kind of emancipation would that be? And then let's just talk about why a 300-person workforce of emancipated slaves were re-enslaved. If you will look at all of these bales of cotton on the docks in Galveston, waited to be shipped all over the world, then maybe you can understand why the planters needed to get 2.5 more years of crops collected and harvested to be shipped all over the world. This is why they were late. But do not confuse the holiday, Juneteenth, with emancipation of these 300,000 people. In Galveston, there were only 1,000 to 1,500 people who were enslaved in Galveston as servants in the big houses and in the mansions. The other 299,000 emancipated Black people were working on plantations and small farms. Hopefully you understand now why they were emancipated late. But emancipation means just what the document said, that you are equal to your slave masters, and the relationship between you shall be that of employer and employee, which also did not happen because this huge workforce was re-enslaved by two methods, sharecropping and convict leasing. And then if you will put up my third slide, why the 2018 unearthing of 95 convicts resurrected conversations about slavery, convict leasing, and what does that have to do with 21st century incarceration? The past, you must understand, is connected to the future. And that's why convict labor and the unearthing of 95 graves that were once the remains of convicted laborers was so important. I hope you will keep that in mind as we talk about why are so many African Americans incarcerated today? Because if we cannot connect the history of the past with the history of today, then it will not make a logical conclusion for the future. My fourth image is connected to how politics of fear by the KKK and white supremacy not only threatened the emancipation of African Americans immediately after the Civil War, but that white supremacy in the persons of the KKK, the Knights of the Golden Circle, and other organizations that have promulgated fear among Blacks and non-whites is still so threatening today. We're even hearing people say today that they want to go back into a civil war. If we were to go back into a civil war and ignore the emancipation of non-white peoples, the future that we will face will be one of autocracy. Many Black Americans do not like to discuss or even hear anything about slavery because it makes them feel weak and powerless when they know they are not weak and powerless. Black people do not think of themselves as slaves and dislike any references to slavery. But what we have to remember is overcoming slavery is our biggest victory, and we must not be threatened by our historical remembrance of slavery because whites do not like to talk about it. What we have to do is respect the Black resistance movement. People like Robert Smalls, who sailed his family on a ship right past the Confederate Army in the thick of night, or Ida B. Wells, whose newspaper press was burned to the ground for telling about massacres like the lynching of Jesse Washington in Waco, Texas, which I might say was one of the most hideous lynchings in the history of America. So where do we go from here? Knowledge has the power to resurrect us all, but only a few will learn, and only a few opportunities will be made available to teach the correct history. We must overcome, however, these lies, and we must use every opportunity to teach the truth and how it had led us to where we are today with replacement theory. Continued belief in our inferiority and combating white supremacy and violence against our humanity is something we must do at every opportunity. For 2 centuries, the slaves were hemmed in and brutalized, forced to believe in their inferiority. And overnight, When emancipation gave them the chance to control their destinies, they seemed transformed. They became students, teachers, preachers, lawmakers, soldiers, each with his own particular brand of eloquence and mother wit. In no other period of American history have Blacks gained so much in the face of adversity and violence against us. Every time Blacks made strides, the KKK, the white supremacy seemed to pull them down. And so in no other period have so many ordinary people become heroes overnight until the second Reconstruction, which was during the Civil Rights Movement. And today I would like to say to you is a time that we need to fully embrace a third Reconstruction. The first Reconstruction was immediately after the Civil War. The second Reconstruction was during the Civil Rights Movement for about 5 years between 1963 and 1968. And now we're in the middle of the Black Matters movement. This is our third Reconstruction. But once again, the Klan has swarmed around our administrators and our politicians and we are still having to brave death in the struggle for our rights. Also, I'd like to just tell you that in 1859, the powers that be in Texas decided to reopen the slave trade. You know that the slave trade was the capturing of Africans across their continent, put in the bottom of ships and sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, a process which took 2 months. They were distributed all across the islands, the Caribbean islands. If you made it to Cuba, which was the largest of the Caribbean island, it was like an incubator for African-American slaves. You made it to Cuba, you might go to North America, to Central America, to Mexico, or South America, because it is in all of these places that the African diaspora exists. But I just want to tell you that Africans are the chief witnesses to the enslavement period in America. We are the chief witnesses to Reconstruction, and they were not successful in reopening the slave trade, but they certainly didn't think about it. So if we're going to profit or use Juneteenth in any positive way, we're going to do more public education so we can get people to quit believing in racial theories, which have no scientific basis, and quit believing in the intellectual inferiority of African Americans, so that our children can get an equal education and be equally competitive on the world stage. Thank you.
That was, I'm sorry, I broke your jaw. That was great. And on that note, I would love to also bring in Chardee Sellers. She is a writer and producer, and I'm so excited to have you here today, Chardee. If you can just introduce yourself really quickly.
Hi, thank you for that intro, Lauren. My name is Chardee Sellers. I'm a writer-producer originally from Lansing, Michigan, but I currently live in Burbank, California. I would first like to thank Final Draft for having me as a guest today. I don't feel like I really belong here, because Ms. Carrier, that presentation, I was off camera, but I was crying and I had to go run and touch up my makeup. And just looking at you and hearing your presentation and knowing that you're a teacher and educator and you spent your years educating people like me and Lauren and countless other kids, it makes me really humbled and happy to be in your presence and to be here, because our educators are so important to us in this country, but worldwide. But also, I recently lost my 2 grandmothers, and they would have loved your presentation, and it made me think of them. So I'm very happy to be here to share this time with you. So thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure.
Chardee, you grew up in Michigan, as you just said. So when did you first learn about Juneteenth, and was this something acknowledged or even celebrated in your schools or community, or how was that growing up?
No, I grew up in Lansing, Michigan, and while Lansing and Detroit and Grand Rapids and Flint are predominantly Black, as Ms. Carrier was outlining, our school boards aren't. So no, this wasn't a thing that was taught to us, and I went to a public school. So it wasn't until I moved to Los Angeles in 2009 when I was 19, and I met Black people from Texas who were talking about Juneteenth, that I even knew what it was. And then it wasn't until I saw Atlanta, the TV show, which we're talking about media and how important that is for education. They did a whole episode about Juneteenth, and that's really the first time I ever saw it mentioned on TV. So it was really my friends from Texas who had taught me about it, because I never knew what it was growing up.
And so, like, how did that make you feel when you first learned about Juneteenth, and then you began? I don't know if it led you on a journey to kind of like research, or did it inspire you to teach others, or how did it make you feel?
I do remember vividly how I felt when my friend told me what it was. I felt shocked at first, and I was like, what? This is a thing? And then I felt disappointed and angry because of the history of Juneteenth and how it came to be, and frustrated. And then as I got older, it was a real shift for me to stop celebrating 4th of July and start celebrating Juneteenth. That was a conscious decision I had to make in my 20s to go, especially with what everything was going on in this country, that I said, I don't feel comfortable anymore celebrating the 4th of July because I don't feel independent. I don't feel free in this country as a Black woman. But I do feel like the celebration of Juneteenth makes me feel like we are acknowledging something that was very real and it happened, and I don't want people to forget it. So that has been what I've been doing for the past, I want to say 3 or 4 years now. And the fact that it's actually a national holiday now makes that a little bit more easier, to take work off, because it wasn't a national holiday before. So it was like, what is Juneteenth? You can't take work off. This is not a thing, except for other people like you who are celebrating. So I forgot the original question, but basically what I'm trying to say is that it's a national holiday now, and I think that's a great stride. But I don't want it to turn into a national holiday where we're just barbecuing and going to the beach and celebrating a day off, without acknowledging why we're actually celebrating this holiday.
Yeah. So with that said, to kind of piggyback off of what you mentioned in regards to, being a national holiday, and some people get off, or you take the day off, you don't want it just to be about a barbecue. So what does it mean to you to see companies like Cast and Crew acknowledge and provide a platform for learning about this pivotal moment in time? Because for me, this is the first time that I've been a part of a company and they were like, no, we're recognizing this and you have the day off, and they're definitely invested in us educating everyone who wants to become educated. To me, I just was completely, I was blown away, and I felt it was long overdue. And I think that every company should be doing the same. But, how does it make you feel?
I would say, first of all, Cast and Crew were the first people to approach me in 2020 during the Black Lives Matter resurgence with, would you like a platform? Would you like a job? So this is not new to them. This is true to them. When it comes to other companies, again, my fear is it's also Pride Month. June is also Pride Month. My fear is that we will turn Juneteenth into some capitalism propaganda where we'll make T-shirts and cups and ice creams and all these really great products that people can buy to decorate, but we take away the education side, which is what Ms. Carrier has been instilling in us this whole conversation. You cannot just celebrate this holiday without being educated on what's it about and how it affects us, not just Black people, how it affects this country, because Black history is American history now. So the education part of it to me is more valuable than a plate, a T-shirt, some hats, things like that. I really hope when people watch this presentation, they're watching to listen and not watching to respond, which seems to be really popular in our community nowadays. We're waiting to react. But I hope they really take heed of the presentation that was just presented and what we're talking about to understand why this holiday is so important.
Yeah. And with that said, there's a lot of people that want to learn more about Juneteenth, and they're wanting to find ways to celebrate. And we've seen in the media, there's been uproars about different merchandise that companies are selling, and both for you, Mrs. Carrier, and for you, Chardee, what are some recommendations that you would have for someone who wants to learn how to start celebrating this holiday? What's the best way to greet someone? Should they go out and buy all those plates and hats and all those things that say Juneteenth? What advice would you give them?
There are a lot of things you can do to shed light on the history itself. There are any number of films that you could have a film festival. For example, on Juneteenth, the Sunday, I will be in Hallettsville, Texas, which is the county seat of Lavaca County, where my father was born, where my grandparents were enslaved. And I will be showing a film called Places in the Heart that was set in 1935 in Waxahachie, Texas. It was in the middle of the Depression, and the people's attitude toward Black people then was the same as it was in slavery. The same attitude, but not the same, not quite the same restraints. The Black man who was a homeless, who begged at the door of the white woman whose husband had just been killed by a drunk Black guy, was finally fed and helped her raise a crop of cotton so she didn't have to sell her farm. And I think the reason that it was named Places in the Heart, because it shows some reconciliation and some healing there, and that's what we need now. If we cannot understand each other, if we cannot understand the anger that Black people must feel, we must be proactive and quit talking and just being reactive. We must demand for this situation to be repaired.
And to piggyback on that, because that was perfectly said, Juneteenth is now a national holiday, meaning most people, federally wise, have the day off. So what do you do with that day off? My thing is you go invest into Black businesses, especially small Black businesses in your area. So I run a nonprofit called the Social Ripple Effect. And every year since 2020, we have hosted a Black marketplace in LA, and we sponsor 10 to 20 small Black business vendors, whether they're selling products or services. We have from production companies to candle makers to body scrub makers, whatever. They come, they don't pay a vendor fee. They set up a table and a tent, and we invite the community around that area, which is usually somewhere in the central Los Angeles or West Los Angeles area, to come and buy from them and to support them and get to speak to them and know them. Because that, just being a small business Black owner, that has residual effects from slavery, whether you want to believe it or not, where Black people were refused loans. And Ms. Carrier, yes, I'm sure you know more than I do about that.
That's an excellent way to celebrate Juneteenth. And the fact that you're not charging them a vendor fee, which some of them may not be able to pay anyway, that's excellent.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's really important to us, because if you don't know, a lot of these places where you do these pop-ups, they're $250, $350 vendor fee to cover costs. Mm-hmm. We're a nonprofit. We get the tables donated, the tents donated, the chairs donated, everything that we need. All they have to do is bring their products. And if they need help bringing their products, we will help them bring their products. If they have an online store instead, we will help them set up an online store. But the most important part is business owners. It's hard to be a business owner, period. My mom is a business owner of 21 years. This is a Black woman in Michigan. Okay. But historically, our people were not even allowed to start their own businesses, or were denied loans, or had rent increases, things that prevented us to be in the marketplace. So when we talk about money, transactional money, there's a reason why I want to do a marketplace, because whether you believe it or not, money rules this world, especially in this country. And when we empower the Black dollar, we can empower things like education and reform and building up our neighborhoods. But without money, we can't do that. So for me, if you're going to celebrate Juneteenth as a non-Black person, or even as a Black person who is not African-American, because remember, not all of us are African-American. My mom's side is Latino American, and my dad's side is African-American. So my mom doesn't really celebrate Juneteenth, right? Because that's just not in her history, and that's not how she grew up. So whether or not you're not a person of color, or if you're a white person, or if you're just not you're not celebrating Juneteenth, I think the best thing you do is look in your neighborhood, and it's as easy as a Google search to see who are the small Black owned businesses in my neighborhood and how can I support them? Do I buy an ice cream? Do I buy a t-shirt? Do I go online? What can I do? But education is number one too. I think watching this video is very important. And luckily, since we're recording this, you can post this every year. The information doesn't change. It's not going to change.
I love that. And so what would you all say to someone that I want to walk up to someone and say, hey, happy Juneteenth. Like, what would your response be to them? Or what would be the best way that they should greet someone?
Well, I don't know about Ms. Carrier, but again, I don't think all Black people will celebrate Juneteenth. I think instead of saying happy Juneteenth, for me, because it's still really early as a national holiday, it feels kind of weird if someone came up to me and just said happy Juneteenth. I think use your actions rather than your words. Go buy Black. Go buy Black, go support something, go educate yourself, buy there's many wonderful children's book about Juneteenth online that I have recommendations for later. Do that. It's okay just to greet people, just to say hello. You should do that anyway. But I don't know. For me, it feels awkward if someone says happy Juneteenth to me. I don't know, Ms. Carrier. You're from Texas, so maybe it's normal there.
You could say back at you.
Back at you? There you go.
But I just wanted to say that the fact that Juneteenth is now a national holiday, it is an opportunity to recognize the importance of slavery as a cornerstone to capitalism. Mm-hmm. When the Civil War began in 1861, the value of Southern slaves was worth more than all the railroads, all the banks, and all the insurance companies combined. That is how valuable we were. And it is because of that value, cheap labor. We were brought here because in order to get this new world started, there needed to be cheap labor. And it wasn't even cheap, it was free as far as we were concerned. And so the federal holiday is an opportunity for us to insist upon our importance to the economic growth of this country. And I remind people of that at every opportunity.
Yeah. And just to add really quickly, I know some people are listening to this, if it's audio or watching this, and they're saying, why should I care about this? It doesn't affect me. I wasn't the slave owner. Why? Well, I wasn't the slave either, but I'm still hurt by things that happened hundreds of years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. They still affect me.
So I will ask, if you had to describe, let's just say someone asked you to explain what Juneteenth is in 2 sentences, how would you briefly describe what Juneteenth is?
I think I'll go so I don't embarrass myself and go after this character. Someone asked me what Juneteenth was. I would say simply this: Juneteenth is an opportunity for you to educate yourself on the history of America, but especially the Black history of America.
I love it.
Juneteenth is now a federal holiday that recognizes the importance of slavery to the economy of America, and it is worth celebrating so that we use Juneteenth as an opportunity to stimulate reparations for African Americans.
And before we close, Chardee, I know that you said you have some book recommendations, and I know, Ms. Carrier, you have a lot of recommendations as well. So would you mind just kind of sharing some of the books, movies, or anything that you would recommend that individuals go and take a look at or read in order to learn more as they're on their journey?
Yes. Well, for my adults, the first thing you need to do is follow Ms. Carrier. I mean, she's an educator, she's a teacher. Go ahead and follow her. I found her stuff on her website very quickly, so it's not hard to find her. For anyone with children, there are wonderful children's books for you to slowly introduce your kids to the stories of Juneteenth. And the one that I looked up that I really read and liked was The Juneteenth Story, Celebrating the End of Slavery in the United States by Elia L. Agostini. Just came out in May, and it's a really great picture book I think kids could get a lot from. And then teachers, because we love teachers because they are so selfless. They have the hardest job in the world. weareteachers.com. They have a whole lesson plan on how to educate kids about Juneteenth. I went through it, and it's amazing. And the last one I will say is for anyone who is ASL, who has to sign and who has hearing impaired students, because that's important. We can't leave them out of the conversation. The CSDlearns.com has whole Juneteenth resources in ASL. So you can teach that to your children as well. So those are my resources.
Would you mind repeating that last website that you said? I'm sorry, Chardee.
Yes, and the last website is an ASL resource for hearing impaired, and it's csdlearns.com, and they have Juneteenth resources that are signed. So you can literally just put the video up and show them to your students, and they can also get educated as well.
Love it. Thank you for sharing.
I'll just add one more. Annette Gordon-Reed got a Pulitzer Prize for her book on Juneteenth. She's a native Texan. I'll be listening to one of her lectures virtually this week, but you might want to check out her resource on Juneteenth. And of course, I'll recommend my own book, Go Down, Old Hannah, The Living History of African American Texans, was published in 2010 by the University of Texas Press. It has an extended appendix in the back with recipes and song lyrics and some of the stuff that we used to do when I taught Lauren and her classmates Black history. So those are my recommendations, and I refer you to my website.
Awesome. So with that said, do you all have any closing remarks or anything that you would like to say before we close?
I have one. In your celebration of Juneteenth, do not confuse the holiday with the status of emancipation.
And I would just like to say also thank you for having us again here. Social Ripple Effect, www.socialrippleeffect.org. We are hosting our third annual Juneteenth event on June 18th, Saturday, so the day before actual Juneteenth. And you can go to our website to learn where the location is, but come and support Black-owned businesses and meet them and talk to them and ask them what their struggles are as business owners, and learn about Juneteenth. And we will have a memorial for the Buffalo victims as well there. So please come out if you're in the LA area. If not, you can go online. We'll have a list of those vendors and you can buy from them online. So you can do that from anywhere in the world.
And if you have any children, you might have them watch Nickelodeon on Juneteenth. They did an interview with me at the Moody Mansion in Galveston so that we could teach the children about Juneteenth. And of course, Lauren, I was jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton.
I remember that. Aww.
That's awesome. Good Nickelodeon. That's how you use your platform. Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chardee and Mrs. Carrier. This conversation has truly been phenomenal. We've shed tears, we've laughed, I just can't even explain how full and happy my heart is to not only have this conversation because it's so important to me on a personal level, but I've had so many individuals reach out, just wanting to genuinely learn more about this pivotal moment in history, because again, to your point, Mrs. Carrier, we have to heal and we have to understand in order to learn, grow, and be better.